We want to welcome everybody back to our series that we have been doing since the last of March, where we have this series called Relevant Conversations in the Current Crisis. Again, this is a series, just to remind you, that's aimed really at building an open forum for dialogue to really discuss some conversations to where we learn to empathize and understand and learn how to cope with this ever-changing landscape of our new world. And of course, we have more and more that seems to be thrown at us each day. We have with us today Dr. Ed Amend. He's a clinical psychologist and founder of the Amend Group, which is a Lexington-based comprehensive center for psychological, educational, and gifted services. Dr. Amend provides in-person and virtual consultations for a wide variety, including parenting and homeschooling, educational options, and other ongoing support for parents and children, and not only in Kentucky, but also in Ohio, and virtually everywhere in the world. So he is the co-author also of 2 award-winning books, A Parent's Guide for Gifted Children and Misdiagnosis and Dual Diagnosis of Gifted Children and Adults. He's authored a lot of articles. He's authored very many book chapters, a lot of columns, written a lot of columns, presents locally as well as nationally on various topics relating to parenting, discipline, communication, motivation, resilience, and assessment of children. If Dr. Amend, if I am not mistaken, you spend a significant amount of time in the assessment of children. So tell us a little bit more about what that means as far as what your practice focuses on.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yes, I do a lot of counseling, therapy, and assessment. The assessment focuses on a variety of issues. Certainly a good deal of my personal work. I work with gifted and talented children who have concerns or challenges, but we also do assessments of things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. We look at depression, anxiety. Our practice works mostly with children and adolescents through college age for ADHD evaluations. These assessments are really tailored to address the specific needs. So parents will come in and say, hey, we're thinking about, we're concerned about this issue, and then we'll create the assessment to try and gather the information that the family is looking for in order to answer the questions that they have. Those evaluations can be on the shorter end of 2 to 3 hours of looking at a specific issue, or could potentially be as long as 10 to 12 hours if we're looking comprehensively at kind of all aspects of life and trying to assess the best place moving forward.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to have you. Very appreciative of the fact that you're willing to take this time to spend with us today. And, as I look back at all the sessions that we have covered so far in this particular series, and as I've reached out to various people to try to see what interests that they have and topics that they wanted to cover, I will say that the ones that always rose to the top tended to center around mental health, and even particularly as it related to how to, as parents, to deal with all the effects of COVID-19, and that was true kind of in the very early on stages of COVID-19, and still kind of getting those kind of questions. So it's really special to have you with us today, because I know that you can speak very clearly to that end, since that is your area of specialty. And we're now almost 3 months into this particular, work from home, everybody kind of having to socially distance. We've kind of been under this lockdown now for nearly 3 months, and things are really just now beginning to kind of open up. And there's this sense of, well, what's this going to look like in the world in which we live? So I know you've been having some of these series yourselves in various podcasts, various webcasts that people have had you on. I know that you've written some resources for it, specifically as it related to gifted children, but resources also that are very adaptable to all children. So what have you seen kind of start in this whole process? Because I know you were really early on bringing some resources to the table to parents, versus now where we're beyond the school year. Some things have certainly transpired now that we have a little bit better grasp on than we had before. But what is the kind of soup to nuts of what you have seen in your practice in some issues that, we definitely still need to tackle today?
Sure.
COVID-19.
Yeah, for sure. Parenting in general is always a challenge. As we know, all those of us that are parents, raising our kids always causes us to question what we're doing. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? And when you throw COVID-19 in the middle of that, it just creates a lot more self-doubt in parents. And that's been really the biggest challenge that I've seen with parents is, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right things? Am I taking care of things in the right ways? And so in the beginning, yeah, those were the questions. What do I do? How do I deal with this? And we talked a lot about the uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we want to reassure our kids we're doing everything we can to keep them safe. And so we focused on that uncertainty aspect and trying to, kind of live and tolerate with some of that uncertainty. As we've gone along, and it has continued, the frustrations started then to be, well, wait a minute, I've got to work, and I've also got to supervise my child. I have a 6-year-old who normally would be at school, and now they're at home, and I'm trying to work and do my work from home, but I've also got to, normally I sit with my 6-year-old to do their half an hours of homework a night. And now I can't be there all day with them while they're doing their work. And how do we balance that? And those challenges cropped up, and we talked about structure and routine and finding ways, to manage that. And now we're getting into the phase where, wow, school's out, but all the things that I've missed along the way, I missed graduation. I didn't get to have my graduation. I was really looking forward to that. And that doesn't just go for high school and college graduations. These are, they're 8th graders or 5th graders or, kids moving from elementary to middle school that miss the end of that exciting time and get on to, the opportunities to share. So there's a lot of, now we're getting into the phase where there's a lot of grief about the things that we've missed, the summer vacations, the summer camps we can't go to. So those are some of the things that we're starting to see now, is that challenge with, well, okay, we're starting to look at all that I've lost, not just personally in terms of these activities that I didn't get to, but maybe we lost relatives, maybe we lost friends, because this disease is awful, and it's taken people from our lives, either permanently or at least temporarily, where we can't go visit our grandparents because we might take something to them. So those are some of the things that are coming to the forefront now, and we are seeing, as the other mental health provider that you had on a couple of weeks ago was talking about, we're seeing an increase in calls to mental health helplines and things of those natures. And it's just such a big challenge as the longer this goes on, and we continue to deal with uncertainty. It becomes more and more of a challenge.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that from the very beginning. When we first entered the throes of the lockdown, I think to some degree it was novel in that, children adapted fairly well, maybe early on, simply because it didn't rise to the level of attention and at first, it's just how serious it may be. So it seemed rather precautionary at first, but then the numbers started getting staggering. The numbers started growing. And it was a little fun to stay at home because there's no school now. But
it was spring break. It was extended spring break for a number of folks in the beginning. Oh, I got an extra week of spring break. This is great. Right. And I know, many colleges, for example, they had planned, an extra week of spring break and then maybe another week of online, but many of them had planned, and my daughter specifically is one, they had planned to come back. They sent them home. Right. So you get an extra week, and then you get a week of online, and then we'll have it all ready and you can all come back. And that was kind of the plan for many folks at that. Yeah, just get a little bit of extra free time. And then, as you said, it's changed.
Right. And so that newness kind of wears off after a period of time. And then we might start seeing different patterns of behavior in our children, because that part of it no longer is, it's easy to handle that early on with days and maybe a few weeks. But there's a big difference now that we see the numbers escalating, and we've seen the numbers escalating, and it's taking a little bit longer to phase into this. When we're talking about the ways in which children adapt or the ways in which children handle this, at this point in time, I'm sure you've seen, various levels of anxiety, various levels of worry. And, there are differences between the two, from worry to anxiety. So first of all, help us understand those two differences. I think that's important to clarify. So what is the difference between, a child's worry versus a child's anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Certainly we all worry. We all worry about things on a day-to-day basis. And clinically, we look at a couple of big factors related to how big of a problem is this. typically we look at the frequency, the intensity, and the duration. Yes, I worry about whether I'm going to do this or do that tomorrow afternoon, but it doesn't take up a significant amount of my time, and I'm able to focus on my work. It doesn't affect my concentration. It doesn't affect my ability to get other things done. But if I'm worrying so much about whether or not I turned the oven off this morning and I need to go home and check, and as I go home and check, I think as I get there, I look at it, I touch it, I check it, it's off. And then I go back to work and go, wait a minute, though, but when I turned it off, did I actually turn it on? Did I mess that up again? And so, when you're looking at some level of that type of worry, that's a little bit more, a little bit more intense. So the first is the frequency. Is it an everyday thing? Are we worrying all day, every day? Or are we occasionally worried about this or that, issue? Intensity is how intense it is on 1 to 10 scale. I mean, is this a kind of, it's a mild bother, or it's no, I'm incredibly intensely worried about this 24/7, or even, not even 24/7, but and then the duration, how long has this been going on, or how long do these worry episodes last? Is it a 5-minute thing? Is it a 20-minute thing? Is it an all-day thing? So we look at those three things. How frequently does it occur? How intense is it in duration, to determine whether we're dealing with a clinical type anxiety problem or a more typical, this is the kid worrying. And when we talk about worry and anxiety, yes, there's definitely a difference in that intensity and the frequency, but they all are related to this issue that I've mentioned a couple of times already, that uncertainty. Dealing with anxiety, dealing with worry is about living with uncertainty, figuring out ways to address that uncertainty. How do I tolerate uncertainty? There's uncertainty every day. Every one of us knows, and you always hear, you could be in a car accident on your way to work today. Yes, you could. That's uncertainty. How do most of us deal with that on a day-to-day basis? We just do. We tolerate the fact that that is a possibility. We put it in its place and say, yes, it's a possibility, but it's a minor possibility. And we move forward and go through our days. When things become more uncertain, it becomes harder to do that. And when you've got things that are so far out of your control, like a world pandemic, that's just uncertainty from day to day. Nobody, your guess, I tell people, your guess is as good as mine, what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone next week. Nobody really knows. And finding a way to address that is important. So what we talk about with kids is, and it was much easier when they were in school. When they started into school, parents developed kind of some predictability, some structure, some routine, and they were able to kind of flow through that. Maybe your child got up at 9, did some work, got breakfast, did some work from 10 to 12, and maybe took a lunch break, did a little bit more work, and then they were done. But we had a predictability, we had a routine, and that helps with some of that uncertainty and some of that worry, because that clarity and structure and predictability helps. But now, as you said, we've transitioned, we're out of school in most cases. And so now we've got all day. How do we continue to provide some structure in those situations, especially without daycares, without summer camps, without a variety of things that parents would do to help them cope? So I went a long way from worry and anxiety, but that's kind of some pieces there. So. Mm-hmm.
And we certainly, when we're dealing with this topic, you mentioned you even deal with a very wide range of what we call children. I mean, all the way to, post high school and even early college. I don't know that we would define that as young adult, I guess.
Right.
But still, they're in very formidable years. And I think that's what's important. And some children are in more formidable years than others. So, and the age range, as well as the cognitive development of children at those ages, the expression of anxiety, the expression of worry is going to be different depending on what age of child that you're dealing with. So in general, as parents, as we see, now that, school is over, and so some of that structure has gone away, and now we leave, we're kind of heading into that where maybe an unstructured period, or things where we anticipated that the summer is going to be different. What do we need to be looking out for as it relates? What are the signs, I guess, of anxiety at some of these different levels of children that we need to be, as parents, very cognizant of, because they can't necessarily always express themselves. I've got anxiety. That's just not the way they're going to come to us.
Correct.
So, me as an adult, I pretty much, I may not know every time that I'm anxious, but I certainly understand through experience what that anxiety is like. So it's easier for me to communicate. But children aren't that way.
True. That's a great question. And I'm going to point folks to a resource. The National Association for Gifted Children did a tip sheet on helping support your gifted child. Attached to the back of that, though, is a developmental chart of typical developmental stages of kids, the kinds of things that they go through, and ways that parents can help support that. So that'll be one resource that your folks can look up. But yes, the point is very well taken. That at those younger ages, you're going to see more behaviors than you're going to see verbalizations. For the youngest kids, you're going to see possibly regression, where there are skills for those 3 to 5 year olds, things that they used to be able to do, they don't do anymore. They may regress in their eating, their sleeping, their toilet training. They may start playing or baby talking. Things that they hadn't done in a while. Those are some of the keys that you might see at those younger preschool 3 to 5 year old ages. When you get up to 6 to 8, you're going to see some of that stuff, but not quite so much. You're going to see a little bit more outward expressions. You're going to see maybe more crying. You may see more a desire to be a pleaser, kind of jumping in and doing things when they're anxious. You may see them verbalizing things like, I'm sorry, when there's really nothing to be sorry about. You may see those kinds of unusual verbalizations. They may start to act out in negative ways as well, because they have these emotions inside. They don't know how to express them, so they kind of come out in those aggressive sort of ways. As they get older, you'll continue to see an intensity of those behaviors. You may not see the crying as much, but you are more likely to see that assertiveness coming back at you. You may see lying. You may see, an intense, the clinginess does tend to come back for those kids as well. So those are some of the things you'll see at those older ages, kind of those 9 to 12 ages. And then adolescence, really it's all over the board. You get some of the verbalization, you get some of that anger, you get some of that backlash. You usually get intense emotion that as a parent, you step back and go, whoa, where'd that come from? And then you have
let's push the pause button on that one. Because I'm a parent of an adolescent, 17-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I differentiate that as anxiety versus typical adolescent behavior? Where at this stage, particularly with my son, let's just take him for 17.
Right.
He's already trying to separate from his own identity away from his parents, spending less time with me, spending less time with his mother, spending less time with family as a general, and trying to spend more time with friends. So how would we differentiate that one a little bit? Because adolescence to me seems like a very tricky area to where I might not necessarily pick up on those cues.
True. Yeah. And that's what, and that's, I think, important as where I was going to go is that when you see those out of control or out of proportional reactions, you do have to hit the pause button and step back and say, well, wait a minute, where does that come from? Is it anxiety? Is it, why is he so upset about this right now? Because we've had this conversation before. He wasn't this upset, or we've gone down this road before. What is it about today that's leading to this increased? So you can't, in most cases, you can't have that conversation in that moment, because if your child is angry, frustrated, or arguing, you're not going to be able to have a rational conversation. We joke, the old joke in the field is you lose 15 to 30 IQ points when you're angry. Now, of course, you can never measure that, but it just seems that way. Your rational thinking isn't as clear when you're angry. I describe it as a seesaw. You kind of go through life fairly well balanced on it's a very simplistic analogy, but you're very well balanced on your seesaw of life, with emotion on one side and thinking on the other. And when you've got that, emotional impact that jumps on your, seesaw like a 300-pound gorilla, thinking flies out the window for a little while until you can get back into balance. And so with, when our kids come to us with this intense emotion, that's not the time to have a great conversation about, hey, what is going on there? But you can dial it back. And most kids, if you have that strong relationship with them, most kids will be able to have that conversation with you when they're calm, and the emotions will still come out, but they'll be very different than the anger and the frustration that you see in those older ages. So.
Well, then that brings up
very
another
difficult. So hang on, just saying. So, but what you're saying is it may be very difficult in that moment to know what the cause of that is. Yeah.
Right. So, in light of that, then, whether we wait for an expression of what we might take on as a cues of an anxiety, what about being proactive about that? Not waiting for that moment to happen and to arrive, but what can we be doing as measures to prevent that anxiety, or kind of nip it in the bud a little bit sooner, and or not necessarily assume, but still have very constructive conversations,
Yeah.
you know, with
Well,
children about that.
Yeah, the first thing that we always emphasize is that communication, and communicating from younger ages with your kids and developing those relationships with those kids so that you have those when they come into these critical developmental periods. Building up a strong relationship, kind of helping them see that you are on their side, showing them that warmth, that empathy, that genuineness, that you are really there to help guide them through life. So if they have those feelings, they're much more likely to have those conversations with you. But one of the things we want to be real careful about, especially when it comes to anxiety, but also anger and any other significant emotion, we want to make sure we don't minimize their concerns in those situations and say, "Oh, well, you're just a kid. Don't worry about that. Oh, well, you know what? Mom and I have that, so you need to worry about that." But they are worrying about it, and so we want to recognize, even in that moment, that's a good thing to do, is to reflect those feelings and empathize. So when they're yelling at you, geez, oh gosh, you seem pretty angry right now. You're darn right, I'm angry. Oh yeah, I guess I would be. And having that empathy for where they're coming from, because there are a lot of things outside of their control right now, and in a lot of ways it does stink that we've got that. So communicating, being clear. We talk about, when we talk about disciplining kids, what's the goal of disciplining our children? The goal is to get them to the point where they can self-discipline. And as they get older, we want to give them more opportunities to do that, trusting them with more responsibilities and more freedoms, and balancing those out. As they get older, we want to be able to do that. All those things show that you have trust in them in order to be able to allow them to have trust in you to help them. So biggest thing, underscoring it all, is that communication. If you have that relationship with your kids, that's going to be huge, because you got to, I always think about it this way. If you got a sixth grader, you've got 6 more years till they're most likely out of the house in some form, college or somewhere else. And once they leave that house, what have you got left with that child? You have the relationship that you cultivated over those 18 years that they were at home. That's really the basis of continuing to have a relationship with them. It's the relationship that you built along the way. And so having that is going to allow a lot of these things. But one of the other things that kind of ties in here is, throughout this process, hopefully all of us are learning a lot about ourselves. We're able to look back and go, I can't tolerate this, or I can tolerate that, or I can deal with this and not deal with that. And as we start to learn that over this process, and this is going to be, I think, especially critical the longer this continues for families, is to be able to express those needs and say what it is they need. Being able to say, this is what I need right now. And again, those younger kids are going to have a harder time doing that, but the longer we go, the more we can have these conversations and help them get to that point where they can express that. But especially those older adolescents, we want them to be able to say, this is what I need right now. I need you not to be here right now. I need you 15 minutes, rather than whatever other ugly thing might come out of their mouth. And if we are, as adults, able to model making those implicit needs very explicit and showing our kids that this is what we need. Like I use the example because it's true. I come home from work right now and I've been staring at a screen most of the day doing teletherapy or talking on the phone. And there's some days I need 20 minutes for nobody to bother me. And if I walk in and I don't say that, I get, hey, do you want to do this? Hey, do you want to do that? Can you do this? Can you help with that? I need to walk in and I need to make that implicit need very explicit and say, I need 20 minutes. Don't bother me. I just need to clear my head and then I'll be good to do whatever, but that's what I need. And so if we can model that, we can help our kids see, oh, this is what's important. I can't say enough about the importance of modeling in any situation, because it's really, really important. Even the simplest things, your kids will start to model you. And this is, especially important in dealing with anxiety, but even on a day-to-day basis.
Well, talk about that modeling just a minute. Let's look at the other side of that, if you don't mind. Modeling the ideal behavior, certainly what we want to see our children doing, we need to model ourselves. But it's also true, too, that, children are going to model our anxieties, our stress, everything that we might be experiencing negatively. What we don't understand sometimes, we don't see, is that we might be the very thing that causes the stress and the anxiety in our children rather than the circumstance. Maybe they didn't necessarily have a framework for that kind of anxiety until they see it in us. So like you said, we need to know ourselves. And I think this is one thing that really has come out with this type of crisis, as big as it is. We've learned probably more about ourselves than what we want to admit. And we need to be rational, and we need to deal with that, because it's a good time for that self-assessment, if for nothing else, the sake of our children. I mean, we need to do it for ourselves, but also for the sake of our children, because they're going to mirror things that they see in us. And so I think one of the points that you had made earlier was, when you say know yourself, if we remain calm and we remain rational and we make our implicit needs explicit, then we can expect our children to do the same as you're talking about now, because they're going to model that behavior. So we're really setting them up for not just periods of crisis, but aren't these really kind of the building blocks of life in general?
Yes.
We're talking about?
I would agree 100%. Yes. And we want and one thing to say about when we know ourselves and doing that self-evaluation, we do have to be careful, because there's a lot of anxiety, because there's a lot of uncertainty. We have to be careful about not making those negative assessments of ourselves and looking at our shortcomings. We also have to balance the things that we are doing well. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. And I've said this several times, especially now. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to yell. We are going to do things we wish we hadn't done. We will have those days that we don't put in our parenting Hall of Fame days. Yep. We're going to have those days, and if we handle those with the same warmth and empathy and genuineness we handle everything else, we apologize for our behaviors, and we talk about how we're going to change, that can help. But yes, we definitely, our kids will see, you've got a 17-year-old. Did you teach him to drive?
Well, between me and his mother, but yeah.
Yeah, I taught my kids to drive too, and as they were, well, my daughter particularly, she was starting to drive, I could see her responding in certain ways that, I might have responded in certain situations. And it's very, very much true that they will see what we do and behave what we do. If we're calmer, for sure, we will exude that calmness. If we show them how to deal with the anxiety, if we show them how to deal with the frustrations and the losses in healthy ways that build resilience, then we're definitely going to help them as they go forward. Yeah. So in some ways, what we're talking about here is, as you said, is, this is good, solid parenting stuff. It's just much, much harder right now.
Right.
There's so much of this other stuff flying around in the world.
Well, and let's go back to your point earlier. You said, don't focus on what you cannot control, but rather focus on what you can control. So I think that is incredibly important, just, really as a staple of life, to learn that, because I think that's a really, really tough lesson. Crises are going to put that to the test even more. And so this is the time, again, to do that. So how do we, what is it that we're trying to instill in our children about what they can control in the situation? What's the reframing here that we need to be doing?
Well, I talk to kids about focusing on the controlling the controllables, or another analogy I use is what's inside your boat. What's inside your boat, what's outside your boat. The things that are inside your boat are the things that you can control, and what's outside your boat. So we want to help kids see, what can we control in this situation? Can I control going over to my friend's house right now? No. Can I control seeing my friend for a video chat? Yes. Can I control being able to go to the local pool and have a swim? No, I can't. But what can I control? How can I get that need met in a different way? Can I control what's going on in the news? No, but I can turn it off. So trying to figure out all these anxiety-producing points and what can we control in those situations. Can I control my attitude? Well, if I work on it, sometimes I can go into things with a positive attitude. Now that doesn't mean if you're depressed, you can just go be happy, obviously.
Right.
I'm not saying that, but you can go into something with a positive attitude as opposed to, going into this is going to be terrible. Recognizing that you can't control the actions of other people, including your siblings, when you would like them to behave differently and not annoy you quite so much, recognizing that you can't. And what can you control in that situation? Well, I know I can go somewhere else, or I can put on my noise canceling headphones, or I can, at this point, maybe go for a bike ride. whatever those things that you can do. So that's the thing to help our kids to do is to identify those situations when they are frustrated about X, Y, or Z. Let's let them allow that, express that frustration, understand that frustration, empathize with that frustration, and then shift to what can we do? How can we address this situation? We want them to come up with solutions as well. And we don't want to give them all the solutions, but them to, start to come up with solutions.
Can you touch on the empathy a little bit more? Because I think sometimes when we talk about, empathizing with our children, I think it's assumed more so that we're listening to them and we're trying to acknowledge their emotions. But true empathy goes a little bit beyond that, does it not?
Yeah, well, and it starts with what you're talking about is, listening and recognizing emotions that are going on there, but also helping them, recognize that you can feel that. No, I can't know exactly what that's like, for some situations in the world, but I can acknowledge the pain that you're in as a result of this. You look at trying to, being able to put yourself in their shoes and no, I can't do that in all situations. Now with my children, there are certain things that they have gone through that I can definitely empathize with. But when we talk about, relating those emotions, helping them see that, the pain that they're in and helping them recognize that you see the pain that they're in, are the pieces there that are important and allowing them to know that you feel as best you can what they feel. Now, in those situations, as I said, we want our kids to come up with solutions. We don't want to always give them the answers to those questions. One of the things I always say is, when our kids are experiencing the things that we're experiencing or we have experienced as a kid, I know what I say is we know how that movie ends, and we may not want them to experience the same ending that we had. So we try to steer them away from those learning experiences and give them a solution. And sometimes we have to allow them to experience some of those small negatives so they can learn how to deal with that frustration, so they can learn how to deal with that. We don't want to falsely rescue them from situations that they might learn from. So yes, we want to empathize with them. We want them to understand that we know where they're coming from, but we also want to point them toward solutions when they're ready. Now, some kids may just need that empathy, may need that hug, they may need that support at that moment, and then we go back later and help them solve the problem. But sometimes, we can't do that in the moment.
Right. It's tough. But one of the things I think we can learn to do to better empathize, and you can speak to this much more than I can, but since you were talking about modeling earlier, is when we're involved in conversations with people is mirroring that conversation. Because that if you can, because I'm not going to do a good job explaining that. I know what it is, and that I'm repeating that back as I'm trying to understand the emotion that they're talking about. Is that a coping, how we can kind of cope and learn to empathize with our children and let them know that we're being empathetic?
Yes, and as you're kind of alluding to, is asking them questions. Am I getting this?
Right.
Are you saying this? And giving them the sense that you want to understand where they're coming from. Because if you just say, I get you, I understand. Yeah, this really stinks. I get you. That helps, but they want to know that you're really getting it. So here's what I'm hearing you say is, you're getting that right. And then they really, feel that you are joining on their side, because there's a lot of people that will say, oh yeah, I get you. But they may or may not be thinking what you're thinking, because we all come at things from different perspectives. And so, yes, when you're mirroring it back, you're summarizing it and you're asking those questions. Hey, am I getting you here? Are we on the same page? Yeah, okay. So now I see why this really is a terrible thing. And of course, this applies to not just parenting our children, but a lot of situations that are happening in the world right now.
And that's good for both parties involved in that, because that's what develops, whereas I think we have some of this innate in us to some degree, I think we have to still build it as a skill, and mirroring starts that process. It seems to me to be a better empathizer and at least repeating our children back so that they know, number one, we listen. Number two, that we're trying to relate to the emotion that they have. And the more we try to relate to that emotion that they have, I know I've experienced that I actually start feeling that emotion with them. And that's where empathy kicks in, it seems.
Right. Right.
And we need to be taking these opportunities to have that kind of dialogue with our children, because it develops a good framework for them to learn how to do the same thing, obviously, is what we're trying to do. We're trying to build their capacity.
Yeah, it was a long time ago that I heard Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said he was talking to a parent, and the parent said, I just don't get it. I don't understand my kid at all. He won't listen to me at all. And Stephen Covey said, you don't understand him. You need to be the one doing the listening to find out where they're coming from, because you're not going to get any more understanding of your child by trying to get them to listen to you. And so we do want to have those conversations. Go ahead.
You mentioned asking questions, and I've heard you say before, you need to learn to ask open-ended questions.
Yes.
So give us some examples of that as we have this dialogue with our children, because it's one thing to go home and say, well, how was your day? Well, that's not really an open-ended question. I mean, it is. We're asking them to respond, but we're also giving them a pass to give us a pretty easy, short answer to that without really going into it. So how can we reframe the kind of questions that we're asking so that we're asking the right open-ended questions to get our children involved in the dialogue?
Right. So those closed-ended questions are the ones that you'll be able to answer yes or no to, or a simple, how was your day? Fine. You get that. Or did you have a good day? Yes. That leads it to a place where you have to ask an additional, did you have a good day? No. Oh, and then I've got to ask a question. So if you can frame those questions in a way that they're are more open-ended, things like, tell me about your day, that can help. Or if you do have to use closed-ended questions because they won't answer an open-ended question, and let me back up. Some kids won't answer those open-ended questions because they think you're looking for one particular right answer and they can't figure out what the answer is. So they will just say something to blow it off, kind of fine or whatever. So think about, in those situations, asking more pointed questions that you might have a follow-up to. So who did you eat lunch with today? As opposed to, did you, if the kid's been having problems at lunch, who did you eat lunch with today? As opposed to, did you have a good lunch? Yes, no. Who did you eat lunch with today? And then at least you have somewhere, oh, who's that? Tell me about that. How did you know them? You've got at least some follow-up questions to that. You need to use a pointed question to get them talking. At least you can have some follow-ups. But those open-ended questions are generally much better. And again, when we talk about a lot of what we talk about with parenting, a lot of what I talk about with parenting, and be clear about that, is we talk about planting seeds. You want to share information in these nuggets with your kids, and you hope that someday they flower. But in most cases, they're not going to the next day. So you want to drop these pieces of information in. So if you're asking these open-ended questions from those younger ages, it does make it easier when they get to those older ages that they're expecting those kinds of things. Now, if you haven't, and you've got an older kid, and you haven't really done that, it does make it a little bit more tricky to do that. But I find that if you're honest with your kids and say, hey, I want to know a little bit more about this, can you tell me more? Unless you're really butting heads with your kid and you've got a really good relationship and a lot of that oppositional behavior going on. In most cases, kids want you to know certain things. Yes, there are all teenagers, especially, there are things they don't want you to know. But there are things they do want to talk about, and they genuinely want to understand. If they feel like it's a safe place to ask you those questions, then they will. If they feel like they get dismissed, then those conversations are not going to go very, very well. So it goes back to that relationship. But open-ended questions, are more the how, or tell me about, or in this case, one of the questions I talk about with COVID-19 is, what do you want to know about blank? To see if your kids have questions about COVID-19 or other issues that are going on in the world. What do you want to know about? And then in that case, it's a lot easier than for them to respond than, do you have any questions about COVID-19? No.
Right.
So getting those open-ended questions can be a way to facilitate that conversation.
All right. One of your other points that you had shared with me earlier is, focus on the future and work towards some sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you look at the landscape we're all having to see right now. So not only do we have the interruption of COVID-19 and the lockdown, now we have other social issues besides distancing that has caused even more upheaval, in the media, and in things that we see happening in our own town, things that we see happening over in the other world. So this almost has a compound effect of the kind of environment that we're in right now. So, walk me through that just a little bit. We're focused on the future. We're trying to get a bearing on some sense of normalcy, but like you said earlier, we're not quite sure what this is going to look like. So when you have that kind of uncertainty and you have this much upheaval in the world, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, on a macro level, that's for very sure. We have no idea what's going to happen, and trying to plan, can be difficult. But we do want to try to do what we can to get some sense of normal on a day-to-day basis. What is normal? What is a normal process now for me? And that normal may only last a couple of weeks, but at least getting some sense of normal, and trying to find a way to make days feel normal as best we can. But you're right. There's so many things going on that looking ahead toward, I have a conference that's scheduled in November. They have not canceled it yet. They're debating whether it's going to be an in-person or a virtual conference. And is it, I don't know. I can't plan for that. I can't, I can focus on that possibility of the future there, but I can't really get any sense of grasp as to what's going to happen, because I won't know for at least a couple of more months what's going to happen with that. And I may even know in a couple of months. So when I say focus on the future, at least looking toward those kind of big goals, and know that we're on a path for our kids. Where am I headed? What is it that I want to do for those freshmen and sophomores in high schools who may not necessarily be thinking about college? Now's a great time. You have a little bit of extra time on your hands, perhaps, to start to explore those things you might not. But I know that I want to go to college, or I know that I don't want to go to college, and this is what I want to do. So what are my paths to get there? While you have some of that flexibility in your schedule, maybe that's where you focus on those kinds of things. But hitting those specific things for our kids will allow them to have that hope, and we definitely want them to have that hope. With what's going on in the world, we want them to see there are good things that are happening now, and we want to see more good things in the future. How can we be a part of that? So getting them to focus on those things that are going well, and not sucked into that cycle of negativity and how terrible things are. If we can get them to see some of the good things that are happening. Now, again, let me back up, and I don't want to sound tone deaf and say there aren't terrible things happening, because there are. There are terrible things happening in the world right now, and we do want to be sensitive to those, and we want to help our kids process those in positive ways. But being able to focus on the change that we want, and again, focusing on the things that we can control in that process. I can't control what you do. I can't control what anybody else does, but I can control what I do to make that change happen. So being able to focus on that end point and knowing where you're going will allow you to focus on that future. And then that in turn will hopefully allow days to have some rhythm and some pattern, so that you have some sense of normal, keeping as many things normal as you can in your house. One of the things that this pandemic has done for us is my work schedule has changed significantly. I have been able to have more family dinners with my family than I ever have before. And because of the way my work schedule has changed with the cutting out of the face-to-face assessment and things like that, so my days were shorter, and that became our new normal. We were able to do those family dinners together. And so when I say get a sense of normal, no, the bigger normal, there isn't such a thing right now. Finding those micro level things, those things in your house that make it feel normal and not so bad. I mean, I saw a tweet that said, hey, today's Tuesday, and I guess we're still doing days like it matters. That's not where I hope people are. I hope people are like, okay, yes, I have some sense of of normal day to day. So.
Well, and maybe it's just establishing a new normal, like you said. It wasn't necessarily normal in the past, but it's going to become the new normal, and it's just an agreed upon. We're going to accept it. We're going to embrace, that this is the new normal, and there's pluses to that. I mean, when we look at the crisis, just by definition, crisis seems like it's all bad, all bad, all bad, everything negative. tailspin downward, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that goes back to what you said earlier. It's a matter of how we reframe this situation. And really it can be a situation, not only for our children's development, but for the family unit and beyond. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to visit things that we might not have visited, at those particular ages, and we're visiting them sooner than we did, than we would have under other circumstances. And so it's giving us a chance to maybe get a head start on things. It's getting us the chance to tackle subjects that, either we kind of ignore in the past, but now we're having to face those topics and deal with that. So I think it's important that we do reframe that so that we just don't have that constant negative spin, which is really hard when you got the media that spins it that way all the time. And so we've got to combat that at home and make sure that we understand that we can establish this as a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah. When I was in graduate school, one of the things I remember from way back when is one of my professors said that the word crisis in one language translates literally to dangerous opportunity. And that's what this is. And it is an opportunity for change. And yes, I will look forward to the time where I don't have to triple check everything I see or hear, just to make sure that I'm hearing the right things, because it is hard to know. I've said before, I think it's great we got some sources of clear information coming to us, and that's great, because we want to know what the best information we can to make our decisions as we're moving forward through this dangerous opportunity.
Absolutely. I think that's great. It's a great perspective, because it really does reframe it to help us understand the positive side of that. So while we wind this down, in the next few minutes, just kind of summarize for us, just some of the things that we've talked about, just kind of wrap it up in a nutshell for us about things we need to be doing as a parent, just kind of in summary form, to bring everybody kind of back to just kind of the bullet list of things we need to be doing.
Yeah, so certainly create some routine and structure as best you can. It's harder now when we've got no school and less of things to take up our kids' times, but finding those ways, finding some things, and I didn't mention this before, but finding some things to keep them occupied. I'll throw you some links with some summer activities for kids to get involved in as they're trying to keep occupied, because we don't have as many sports going on right now. We don't have as many other summer camp opportunities, but finding some routine and structure and creating that sense of normal as best you can. Being aware that there's a lot of uncertainty, and that every day managing anxiety, managing stress is about tolerating that uncertainty and finding ways to handle that uncertainty. Make your needs very clear, what it is you need. If your kids can do that and you can do that, it's going to decrease those fights, because you may be in an argument over something that everybody agrees upon, because nobody's communicating it in the ways that they need to. If you can focus on the future, if you can focus on creating a framework to move forward, those things are make sure that you are having those conversations, asking those good questions, and not minimizing your kids' concerns. Oh, it's okay. It's not. Recognize that they're asking the question, so that they have some concern there. Talk with them honestly and give them as much information, but they don't need all the information that we have. Empathize with their concerns about their losses and their grief about losing out on summer vacations, water parties, relatives, seeing people that they want to see, and help them on a day-to-day basis to kind of communicate well their needs. So those are some of the things that I think are important as we're moving forward and helping our kids adjust to the ever-changing landscape of the world.
Well, we will definitely make those links available, with the show notes to this video. We'll make it available when we attach the video to Facebook, as well as our own website. So if you're listening, those links will be available. We'll make sure that you have those resources. We appreciate you pulling those together to share with them. And certainly thanks for the wrap up there. Very succinct way of things that we just need to be doing as parents. I think this has been a topic, you always wonder about the timing of things, as we were looking at the webcast, where do you put people in? And as far as, what's the perfect time slot to have this topic and this topic? And you can always second guess yourself on things, but being this far into COVID-19 and the changes that our children have gone through, to me, I'm kind of glad we're having this conversation now, because earlier, like I said, it was somewhat new, and our children were relatively adaptable to those situations because the reality hadn't set in. Now the reality is definitely here, and the landscape of the world has changed even more in addition to COVID-19, where now we have other topics that we need to address more specifically with our children when we talk about racism and everything else that's going on in the world. And certainly we've experienced a pandemic from that one level, but the whole world is engaged in this next topic as well. It's just kind of risen to the surface. So it's a good time to really sit down with our children. And I appreciate the tools that you've made available to us today, because these are really critical times in that we're at a pivot point. And we may be even at a pivot point with our children, and this is the perfect time to strike while the iron's hot, as we say, to help our children through it and to develop them into their adulthood. And we're giving them the skills now that they'll need for the rest of their lives. So I appreciate you sharing that. And you do have some really good resources. I've kind of gone through those as you shared those with me earlier. So I'm excited to put those into the hands of anybody who's listening and make those available. Any more that you would want to share with, certainly forward those on to us. But thank you so much for your time. And since you talked about how your day has changed so much, and if you don't mind to conclude with, just from a personal note, what's been one of your biggest takeaways just individually in this whole thing that's kind of changed for you?
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but we started to settle into a little bit of a routine, and then I got sick. I actually had what they believe now, as my doctor says, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. They believe I had COVID-19, and if I didn't have it, I had something really pretty bad for a few weeks, and so that really threw another wrench into adjusting to everything as I'm now quarantined in my house, not being able to see anybody. And so my biggest takeaway from that was just you have got to understand what it is that is important to you. Those 2 weeks without being face to face with my family really made it clear to me that that's something that I need, and I need to do more of, and I need personally to make sure that we continue having these family dinners as much as we do, and we continue to have those opportunities to connect, and finding a way to rearrange my schedule so that I can do that once we do eventually, if we ever at some point open into a regular work schedule. But for me, that was one of the things that was hard for me personally. But so I've learned, even though I spend my life, in the world of psychology, looking at myself, evaluating, but that was something, about myself that I was able to learn. And now I've been able to adjust into, again, what is kind of sort of for me a new normal here, with doing a lot of teletherapy and starting to do some assessments face-to-face starting next week. We'll be able to get back into, to some habits. But that was the biggest takeaway for me, was, learning a little bit more about myself in this process. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for all of us, as we do that. It certainly makes us more relatable, and you certainly have been relatable in this whole thing, but appreciate you sharing even a personal story with us there. And I want to wish you the very best. I appreciate the work that you do. I think it's extremely critical, especially in the area of child psychology, child development, because that such formidable years where a child gets just about every skill that they need to move forward with successfully in life. So helping children out, especially those gifted children and those parents, I can't thank you enough for your dedication to your life's work, and so I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we're happy. We're happy to help. We're here. We've got myself and other psychologists, a couple of consultants who can also help parents and parenting and homeschooling and things of that nature. So we try to do as much as we can, and I think these conversations have been great. Being able for you to take the time to give back to the community as well. So I
appreciate that. And we certainly want to encourage anybody to take advantage of you and your staff and your resources as well during this whole thing, because we know we've all been challenged, no doubt, and it's a conversation that we all need to be having.
Sure.
in assessing. So thank you so much for your time. Again, wish you the very best. We appreciate those who are watching, and we'll make the videos available here shortly, later today or tomorrow, and we'll make all the resources available today. But thanks for joining us. And Dr. Amend, again, best to you, and thank you for your time today.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.